to the main talk. So Courtney, if I could hand over to you to start sharing your screen and begin your presentation.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. First off, I want to be incredibly embarrassingly American and say super thank you for everyone who are here and been patiently waiting. And I know this is really hard, for these really long kind of things here. So I am looking to share my screen here. And I'm going to try and share a portion of my screen so that you just see this this black and white thing here. Is that what you see? Everybody see just the slide? Does that look good for
Yeah,
everybody?
that looks good.
All right,
Yes.
awesome. So, as you probably already know, my name is Courtney Ostaff and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the author of the Teaching Online Handbook and I've been teaching forever. My second master's degree is in secondary education, and I have certifications in math and science and social studies and special education. And currently, I teach online at the secondary level ages 8 to 18. And I want to do a special shout out, thanks to Seneca Learning for having me here today. Super fan of the spaced repetition design. So in today's session, I'm going to introduce some basic principles of online course design. And in this presentation, I'm assuming some things. One, that your teaching online is a complete replacement for face-to-face instruction in a core content area, and that it is fundamentally different from teaching your face-to-face class. Two, you have a high-quality curriculum with emphases in declarative knowledge, procedural knowledge, and hands-on experiences. Three, your curriculum includes a well-planned scope and sequence of facts and skills covered in a spiral pattern over a school year, as well as professionally designed assessments. Four, you are aware of the need to provide a written posted schedule weeks in advance with repetitive types of assignments using a quality learning management system or an LMS to support your teacher-student communication. So that said, the focus of today's session is the creation of a weekly course module in a way that balances simplicity versus rigor. Okay, so while the understandable first impulse in creating a content module is to recreate a unit from your face-to-face classroom, this is not a good idea. Teaching online and teaching in a face-to-face classroom share similarities in the same way that riding a bicycle shares similarities with driving a car. When you try to recreate your face-to-face classroom online, you're gonna be disappointed and angry. It's not necessarily inferior, it's just different. One of the major differences between a face-to-face classroom and a well-planned online course is the course module. While in education school, we're taught to plan units and lessons, online teachers plan by the module. In the course module, the emphasis is not on what the teacher will do, but instead on what the student will do. Course modules should flow in thematic linkages, but they're not often scaffolded like a face-to-face classroom unit. Instead, course modules are more like the episodes of a TV show, which may have a tightly integrated story arc like Kiefer Sutherland's 24. Alternatively, the linkages between course modules may be gentle and only slightly dependent on the last episode, like the happy little trees that Bob Ross uses in The Joy of Painting. If your class is a filing cabinet, the course module is the file folder. In my experience, the module is best organized on a weekly basis. As TV episodes used to be released for us old people, our world organizes things by weeks. So all but the youngest K-12 students have an idea of how long a week is. Students and parents can plan by the week. Now, weeks do not automatically correspond to lessons or units, so you've got to change the way you approach planning. Remember, every module is like a separate file folder with its own label, its own set of instructions, and it contains all the course content. Here's how I planned my autumn schedule for my courses. On the calendar, the first week of school is August 10th. The first day that the school offices are closed is week 4, September 7th, Labor Day in the USA. It's a federal holiday. On that day, teachers should delay assignment due dates, but expect students to complete that full module's worth of assignments. Bump Monday's assignments to Tuesday, proceed as normal. Now, note, at my school, In week 7, students are expected to have an autumn break on Monday and Tuesday. But I didn't delay due dates for those assignments. I treated it instead as a full module. I just didn't offer synchronous class sessions on those days. Instead, I covered the content in the synchronous class sessions more briefly and offered additional asynchronous videos to compensate. Why did I do that? Because later on in week 15, students have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday off. That week, I didn't assign any work, although I did have some optional synchronous class sessions for review. And students earned extra credit for attending those sessions. And then in exam week, I taught no new material and made no assignments other than the final cumulative exam. This keeps that weekly class module intact. Now you've decided how many modules you have in a school year, and you need to decide how much content to cover in each module. And to some degree, this depends on your experience, how you use the content standards, and your curriculum. Most commercial curriculum offers a scope and sequence that you can use to correlate with standards if that's not already done for you. Normally, it's best to use a curriculum as design, which may mean mixing up the instructional units, although teachers will find that they often flow together well. When you make these decisions, you can use them to write the class description for your syllabus, including desired yearly learning outcomes and goals. Now is when you schedule long-term projects. This is also a good time to schedule cumulative final exams and any repeating assignments like monthly self-assessments. Here in the United States, we have content standards and objectives that are to be taught at each grade level. In most cases, those state standards are based on the national standards developed by national organizations. Most teachers work in public schools and will therefore use these standards as required by their state. But standards and objectives aren't learning objectives. For example, fundamentally understanding how fractions work, that 1/3 is more than 1/4, is something that takes time to develop. Mastery doesn't occur in a single lesson. If it did, the McDonald's third pounder burgers wouldn't have flopped. Instead, fundamentally understanding fractions is a learning objective that teachers are going to need to touch several times over the course of a year or even several years. Similarly, writing a biographical essay isn't a standard. It meets CCSS ELA Literacy W.7.2, write informative explanatory text to examine a topic and convey ideas, concepts, and information through the selection, organization, analysis of relevant content. The associated substandards ask for an introduction, organization, development, transitions, and a conclusion, all of which can be met by a biographical essay, but the standards don't actually say anything about a biographical essay as such. In short, rather than use standards to create assignments, use assignments to meet standards. Make sure the work will cover the standard, but don't use the standard as the class spine. They're the signposts, not the road. Instead, when designing the content for the course module, think in terms of the learning objective. What are your goals for that module? When teachers create the daily problem sets, the learning objective should be foremost. That way, when they show up to class and say, "Hey, what are we doing today?" you can go, "Hey, today you are going to learn how to add like fractions." Now, I live in West Virginia, which has adopted the next generation science standards. There are 21 content standards for 6th grade, which leaves 11 weeks open as needed. The first is S6LS1. Students will construct an explanation that predicts patterns of interactions among organisms across multiple ecosystems. Because I have purchased a copy of a textbook and all my students have this textbook, in this case, Holt Science and Technology, Life Science, I can look and see that chapter 18 is about interactions of living things. Excellent. Now we know where we can start our hypothetical school year. Altogether, the 4 chapters of Unit 6 in the textbook cover nearly 1/3 of the required content standards. Given the required scaffolding to review photosynthesis and animal behavior, which are arguably worth reviewing in those 2 relevant chapters, that is 6 total chapters. 1/3 of the 32 instructional weeks is about 10, so you have about 4 more weeks you could add, covering a chapter a week. Using a week to review scientific methods from chapter 1 would definitely be productive, as would another week on evolution, chapter 7 and 8, relevant to ecosystem effects on biodiversity. This saves the last week for review and working on the final details of the major writing assignment and that lab report. Conveniently, those assignments will help meet several of the general reading and writing standards. That's how you do it. You repeat this until you have a tentative plan, including types of assignments, written for each weekly content module in the school year. Perhaps you are unluckily in one of the many places that do not have a paper textbook. Given the copyright constraints for online classes and the widespread lack of broadband for students, you can make a reasonable argument that hunting down used copies of an older edition is a worthwhile use of your time. For example, the 2007 edition of the textbook mentioned above is currently $3.50 a copy on the used book market, and many sellers will cut you a deal when selling a classroom set. It is worth pointing out that buying an inexpensive used class set of textbooks pays for itself by freeing up teacher labor in the first week. Savvy administrators who are moving towards online K-12 classes will ensure their students have paper textbooks, even if the textbooks are used. However, if for whatever reason you cannot lay hands on a textbook, they should spend time now researching sources for good texts that can be used offline. OER, or Open Educational Resources, are popular free resource libraries, although the lack of expertise in instructional design means that these resources are often of poorer quality than professionally designed curricula. Many of them are more suitable for higher education than K-12. Most materials are more suitable. In addition, Creative Commons licenses often used with OER material frequently do not permit posting this on websites. So you've got to read those licensing restrictions carefully. And private schools are often subject to significantly more copyright restrictions than public schools. And option 3 is a huge drain on your time and resources, so I generally don't recommend it. I also do not recommend the regular use of materials from third-party, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit lesson sharing websites. While teachers may sometimes run across a good supplement for an individual unit, using these sources as a major part of an online course has several issues. 1, copyright. If you are accustomed to teaching in a face-to-face class, you're used to that really expensive fair use policy that applies to in-classroom use of copyrighted material. But that fair use policy does not apply to materials teachers create and sell on lesson sharing websites. And so copyright infringement is rampant on these websites. In addition, copyright law for face-to-face classes does not automatically translate to online classes. You can be held legally liable for posting materials that violate copyright, even if you bought it in good faith. The other thing is that good teachers differentiate their instruction. When teachers purchase lessons from third-party, whether for-profit or non-profit lesson sharing websites, the lessons have rarely been made as, well, let's put it like this, they're generic. They're rarely aimed at more than the average student, and online teachers have to differentiate in ways that classroom teachers don't. So this is more work for you. And completing a random worksheet, because it's what you can find the night before, doesn't lead to the same educational result as a carefully designed worksheet that's part of a coordinated plan of instruction. Curriculum design is a science. You can go get a PhD in it. And most lessons from third party, whether for-profit or nonprofit lesson websites, are poor. Generic content from these websites is designed to produce paper products because a document is what is sold. But learning happens in the mind, not on adorable papers that parents can hang on the fridge. In addition, you can't assume that your students have working printers. So content-specific courses require big investments of teacher time and expertise in differentiating the off-the-shelf content for your students. Online teachers cannot easily differentiate on the fly. Oh, hey, Tommy, only do every other question. You can't do that. And so by the time the teacher finishes customizing their purchase, you might as well have created it from scratch. And also, as a practical equity issue, it is incredibly important that by far the majority of material teachers make available to students through the LMS should be quickly downloadable or just not required, so that students can work offline. My general rule of thumb is to assign only what can be downloaded on a trip through a fast food drive-through using that restaurant's Wi-Fi. That means text files are a good resource, as are OCR-capable PDFs and very small image files. Test downloading that file on your phone from the LMS, and if it takes longer than 2 minutes, back it up and try it with a different file type, like a text file. Now, when you finish your weekly planning, you should be able to add a section to your syllabus that looks like this chart. Parents and students need to know what the class is covering and when, so they can arrange their schedules to make sure that students have extra time for more difficult topics or assignments. Keep in mind that these are not set in stone, especially that first year. You'll need to adjust these somewhat. Now, know also that these chart headers will convert easily into the title for each of the weekly course modules. For example, week 1, August 17th through the 23rd, scientific method. Part of weekly planning is deciding what kinds of assignments are useful for a given course and how much they're going to be worth. Clearly, each teacher's situation is going to be slightly different. Teachers need to be able to explain to students what will be required of them, how it will be evaluated, and what is good enough. One way to do that is to provide both a written description of each assignment and a description of the grading breakdown for the course. By having this ready in advance, there are many fewer questions about what students will be doing in the class. Also remember that teachers should not make attending the live video sessions the main part of their course. I'm going to repeat that. Teachers should not make attending the live video sessions the main part of their course. Classroom teachers are arguably the star of the face-to-face classroom stage, but in the online classroom, teachers play a supporting role. Even when teachers are on stage, students are distracted. For this reason, every piece of necessary information reviewed in live class sessions should be available in writing in the course module, and students should be taught how to find that information. Now, at best, about half of U.S. students have broadband internet access, but not all internet access is created equal. For our hypothetical 1/3 of students who use a smartphone for broadband access, as per the most recent Pew Research study, even if parents can use their phone as hotspot, broadband on phones is much less than hardwired broadbands. 2 students can't both attend a synchronous session at the same time or both watch assigned YouTube videos at the same time. There simply is not enough bandwidth in the pipe. Therefore, teachers need to limit the amount of internet-intensive activities they assign in a weekly content module. Furthermore, even in the wealthiest, most tech-savvy households, there are a limited number of devices. I teach a relatively wealthy subset of kids, and I have had students who had a sibling group of 4 sisters who were swapping out SIM cards between devices to come to class. This emphasis on keeping learning simple also applies to gamification. While initially students may go, "Oh, this is so much fun, this is new," in reality, they often wander off to YouTube. As Clark and Mayer write in E-Learning and the Science of Instruction, there is not research support for the wholesale conversion of traditional training formats to game-based formats. Establish a habit of completing problem sets because it's the best way to learn, not because it's fun. Now, while everything the students need should be contained within the LMS, if a teacher does decide that an outside website or app is essential to the course, such as computer adaptive software, then that expectation should be clear up front. Parents will have to figure out how to access the website and make sure their child knows how to do it independently. If they can't do it independently, don't use it. Recall that teachers must explicitly demonstrate in a recorded video how to access the website or app, and then you've got to show students exactly what they're going to be doing once they're in. Otherwise, parents and students will be immensely frustrated. Now, digital extras are usually meant for the face-to-face classroom, so they're rarely useful for the all-online classroom. Just like in a face-to-face classroom, you've got to consider your trade-offs. Often, teachers are better off refining teacher talk, which is especially important online, improving concept presentation, making connections with students, and so on. Overwhelming students with a number of locations and gadgets and apps is easy to do. And if you overwhelm them, bye-bye, they'll just skip it. Why would teachers use something that doesn't directly improve student learning? If it's not directly useful in improving student learning, then it has no place in the classroom, no matter how cute it is. Also, many websites and apps are not fully accessible to students who use screen readers like JAWS, or even the built-in accessibility options. According to both the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice, it is illegal to use public funds to purchase technology that supplies inaccessible content, both at the collegiate and at the K-12 level. Very few websites or apps offer any information or activities that aren't contained in a high-quality textbook at an LMS. As Dr. Willingham says, students remember what they think about. Make it the content and not the context. Why spend money on flashy websites when you can invest that money in a textbook? This type of course design is an elaborately structured, self-reinforcing creation designed to improve student learning. For students, meeting all the expectations can feel overwhelming, particularly for students with special education needs. And when students see this type of course, they can also feel overwhelmed. So when students and parents feel like they've jumped into the deep end of the pool, offer them a life preserver in the form of a daily and weekly calendar, along with a list of familiar assignments to be completed, including time expectations. Now, this is just like I use in my classes. You'll see that it includes both a weekly list and a daily calendar. Visual schedules are common in special education, but they benefit everybody, which is why your phone comes with a calendar app. Keep the style of the module calendar the same every week. Note, week 2 is underlined there, meaning that it is a link to open the folder for that week. Teachers will have to demonstrate finding the modules and how to open each module. Also note, most of that work is done offline. So ensure that your video conference sessions are recorded and the students can download the recordings and watch offline. Another feature of this calendar is the clarity between different types of assignments. Also note, I use the title for a learning objective. When they click, this is the sort of thing they see inside. Inside each course module, the assignments should make intuitive sense to students. Everything should be clearly labeled with a minimum of diversion. Every link to an outside resource is an opportunity for them to surf away from learning. So in that list below, students would have to click on the useful videos link to open up another page with the names of the outside videos. As Daisy Christodoulou notes in Teachers versus Tech, distraction is one of the main pitfalls of online learning, and offering students an abundance of hypermedia, or a mixture of images and text and hyperlinks, leads to less learning rather than more. You don't need to decorate your content modules, pretty clip art and photos and whiz-bang videos. You don't win a prize for the best decorated online classroom. Each item in an LMS should be a link to an in-LMS page, a document, or an outside resource set. Everything that students need should be in all-in-one place. Remember, use file types that work on multiple devices, phones and tablets and computers with varying operating systems. Text files are your friend. OCR-capable PDFs are preferred. If the assignment is in a document, instructions written to the student should explain how to complete it and, if needed, how to submit it. If possible, consider auto-releasing encouraging notes when students finish assignments. Inside a module, students should work their way from top to bottom, finishing the week with an assessment on Friday. So, 6 things. Use a weekly module, use a textbook, use an LMS, mind your broadband gap, limit assignment types, and make lists for students. Questions?
Courtney, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. There's an incredible range of practical tips packed into that presentation. We had one question from Marco on how do you reconcile the weekly modules with high stakes exams such as the SAT. Do you think students are missing out on content when taking those exams if they follow kind of those curricula?
I don't think there's any difficulty reconciling it. I, for example, teach Algebra 1 online. I've been doing it for many years, longer than my students have been alive. And, last spring, I got a note from a student who had just had Algebra 1, mind you, not anything else. And she was not great at math, but she was kind of gifted at language. And she had wanted to take English at her local community college, but as part of the community college admissions program, right, then they had them take that compass test. You know what that is? That's to see if you pass all the remedial stuff before they let you into the actual classes. And just on the basis of my Algebra 1 class, she had tested into college algebra. So like I said, I don't think there's any, dip in rigorousness because you do it with a content module.
Okay, that's great. Another question on kind of online teaching more generally. Clearly you have lots of experience in online teaching, but lots of our attendees today will have been kind of thrown into it kind of last March time. If you had to distill your advice to one top tip or a couple of top tips for online teaching for those who are new to it, what would those tips be?
Well, use a content module. Make a list, right? And keep it simple. Like I said, you don't win awards for best decorated. You don't win awards for fanciest videos. What makes it work is that your students know how to do the work. And if you make it simple and you make it so they can do the work, I find that most students want to be good kids. Nobody wants to be the bad kid. If you make it so they can do the work will get done.
And in terms of giving feedback to students whilst teaching online, what do you find to be the best way to give effective feedback?
Well, it depends on, your subject, your content area, your age area. But what I find is that students like to be noticed. And in an online class, it's harder to get noticed, right? So, what I can do is I can call out students, oh, that was a good question that you asked in the chat, Marco. That was really great. Or, you know what, Brian, thank you for thanking me. I appreciate that. Oh, hey, you know what? Flavia asked a great question in the discussion questions last week. Let's talk about that before we get started on our new stuff today. Or, oh, you know what? I was reviewing the problem sets from last week and 70% of you missed this question. So we're going to go over it to make sure that you can do this the next time it comes around on a quiz. So you gather the mistakes, you gather the good stuff, you address it, you send out notes, you send out emails. Last week, I featured one of my students' really excellent drawings on social media with parent permission, of course.
Brilliant. There's one question that's come in from Carrie on having to teach students simultaneously in the classroom and also at home. What are your views on the hybrid learning schedule and how you might adapt your advice?
That is the worst. And I'm sorry that you have to do that. That is totally the worst. So I would get out of it if I could at all get out of it. That would be my first piece of advice. But if you can't get out of it, what I would do is I would still organize it with the content modules, because you can use that both in your face-to-face classroom and online, and then nobody is at a disadvantage. That would be how I would do it.
Okay, brilliant. Another question now to give you the chance for some self-promotion, I guess, but what books would you recommend for online teaching? Kind of your book included, but any other resources out there?
There is a teacher called Flower Darby. Now, she teaches at the college level, but she wrote a really great book called Small Teaching Online. And so that is a really great book. The other one I mentioned briefly, and I'm reviewing to make sure I say this absolutely correctly. Yes, Clark and Mayer wrote a book called E-Learning and the Science of Instruction. And it is extremely technical and extremely dense and just jam-packed with excellent advice. But for my money, the best edu book I bought recently is Kirshner and Hendricks' How Learning Happens. 10 out of 10, do recommend.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I think we've been through the main questions now, so we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you, Jamu, Ozgul, and Jennifer, and all the speakers today. And thanks to all the attendees for giving up your time on a Sunday. Hopefully there were lots of practical tips you could take away. Just a reminder that if you want to take a look at the course that's been published on the Seneca website, specifically on Courtney's book on online teaching, just visit senecalearning.com and you'll be able to find the course there. Any other questions, please follow us on Twitter, so Seneca_K12, and please visit our website, senecalearning.com. You can get in touch with myself and Flavia as well. So thanks very much for attending and have a great week, guys.